I stood outside the heavy oak door of my grandfather's study, my hand hovering over the cold brass knob. I was still wearing my black funeral dress, the fabric itching against my skin in the humid Oakland heat. In my other hand, I clutched the folded American flag the honor guard had just pressed into my palms at the cemetery. The weight of it felt like the only solid thing left in my world. I had come here seeking silence, a moment to breathe in the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco that still lingered in Grandpa Ezekiel's sanctuary. Instead, I heard the one thing that could shatter my heart more than his death. "We have to sell it by Monday, Preston," my brother-in-law hissed. His voice was not filled with grief, but with the frantic, high-pitched desperation of a man watching his life crumble. I pressed my ear closer to the wood. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Monday is too late," Preston continued, the panic rising. "My broker is already threatening to liquidate the portfolio. If I do not cover this margin call by Tuesday morning, they are going to freeze everything. The house, the cars, the accounts. I will be ruined, Vanessa. We will be on the street." "Then sell the house," my sister Vanessa replied. Her voice was cool, detached, the same tone she used when ordering a latte. "Grandpa is gone. The house is just sitting here gathering dust. It is prime real estate. We can list it for $2 million and get a quick cash offer." "But what about Maya?" That was my mother's voice. "Louise." For a split second, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe she would defend me. Maybe she would remember that this house was the only home I had known since I was 18. "She does not need a house like this," Mom said, and the hope died instantly, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "Maya is single. She is always working. What does a woman with no husband and no children need with 4 bedrooms? Besides, Preston, you are the one with a family to protect. We have to prioritize the living, not the dead." I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees buckled, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from sliding to the floor. They were not just mourning differently. They were calculating. While I was at the gravesite weeping as they lowered the man who raised me into the ground, they had raced back here to carve up his legacy. Before I tell you how I walked into that room and burned their plans to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand alone against the people who were supposed to protect you. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and for the last 10 years I have worked as a forensic accountant. I uncover hidden assets and financial fraud for a living. My family thinks I am just a boring bookkeeper who is bad at relationships. They have no idea that I can trace a dollar through 10 shell companies before they even finish their morning coffee. And today, they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. I took a deep breath, smoothing the wrinkles in my black dress. I did not kick the door open. I did not scream. I turned the knob slowly, silently, and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The scene before me was like a tableau of betrayal. Preston was pacing the Persian rug, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. He was a tall man with the kind of polished country club look that my mother adored, but right now he looked like a cornered rat. Vanessa was lounging in Grandpa's leather armchair, his chair scrolling through her phone, probably looking up real estate agents. My mother sat on the edge of the desk, holding a glass of Grandpa's vintage whiskey. Preston saw me first. He froze mid-step, his eyes widening. "Maya," he stammered, a fake smile plastering itself onto his face instantly. "We thought you were still at the cemetery. We were just handling some logistics." "Logistics?" I repeated, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Is that what we are calling $500,000 in crypto losses now, Preston?" The room went deathly silent. Preston turned a shade of pale that made his expensive tan look sickly. Vanessa dropped her phone on the rug. "Excuse me?" Preston laughed nervously, adjusting his cufflinks. "I do not know what you are talking about, sweetheart. You really should not listen to gossip. It is not gossip when I can see the notifications popping up on your iPad from across the room," I said, walking further into the study. I placed the folded American flag on the mantelpiece, treating it with the reverence it deserved before turning back to face them. And given that you work for a mid-tier investment firm, I am guessing you leveraged your own assets to buy into that crash last week. Now you are underwater. Preston's jaw tightened. The polite mask was slipping. You do not know anything about high finance, Maya. He sneered, his tone shifting from defensive to condescending. Stick to balancing checkbooks. This is a complex liquidity issue. It is a margin call, I corrected him sharply, and you are trying to use my grandfather's house as your piggy bank to cover your incompetence. Enough. Maya. My mother snapped, slamming her glass down on the desk. A splash of amber liquid stained the wood. How dare you speak to your brother-in-law like that? He is trying to save this family from financial ruin. He is trying to save himself, Mom, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. And you are letting him sell Grandpa's house, the house Grandpa built with his own hands. He explicitly told me he wanted this place to stay in the family. He wanted me to live here. Mom stood up, crossing her arms. Grandpa was old and confused at the end. He did not understand the value of money in this economy. Preston does. Preston has a plan. And frankly, Maya, you are being selfish. Vanessa and Preston have a reputation to maintain. They have expenses. You have, what, a cat and a savings account. You can find a nice apartment downtown. Selfish. The word hung in the air like smoke. I looked at Vanessa, my beautiful, perfect older sister, who had not said a word to me since I walked in. She refused to meet my gaze, picking at a loose thread on the armrest. So that is it, I said quietly. You rob the grave before the dirt is even settled. Preston stepped forward, looming over me. He used his height to intimidate, a tactic he had used since the day he married into our family. He thought because he was white and wealthy, he automatically commanded respect. He thought because I was the quiet, dark-skinned sister who stayed in the background, I would fold. Look, Maya, let's be adults here, Preston said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. We are not asking for your permission. We are telling you what is happening. The market is hot. We need to move fast. You cannot sell this house, I said, standing my ground. My name is not on the deed, but neither is yours. We have to wait for probate. We have to wait for the will to be read. Preston reached into his briefcase on the desk and pulled out a thick document. He tossed it onto the coffee table with a thud. We do not need to wait for anything, he said, a smug grin spreading across his face. I looked down at the paper. At the top in bold letters it read, Durable Power of Attorney, dated 3 weeks ago, and at the bottom a shaky, barely legible scrawl that looked somewhat like my grandfather's signature. Mom had Grandpa sign this when he was in the hospital, Preston said, watching my reaction with glee. It gives Louise full control over all assets, real estate, and financial decisions effective immediately. And Mom has already signed the listing agreement. My mother avoided my eyes, turning her head to look out the window. I felt a wave of nausea. They had forced a dying man confused by medication to sign away his life's work. The realtor is coming Monday morning to take photos, Preston said, checking his watch. Open house is Wednesday. We already have a cash buyer lined up who wants to tear it down and build condos. So Maya, unless you want the movers to pack your things in garbage bags, I suggest you start packing tonight. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his breath smelling of stale champagne. You have until Monday, Maya. Get out. I looked from Preston's arrogant smirk to Vanessa's indifference, and finally to my mother's turned back. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud, violent snap, but the quiet, decisive click of a lock turning. They thought they had won. They thought the power of attorney was the ultimate weapon. But as I stood there, I felt the weight of the small silver USB drive in my pocket, the one Grandpa had pressed into my hand 3 days before he died, when nobody else was in the room. I looked Preston dead in the eye and smiled. It was not a nice smile. Monday, I repeated softly. Okay, let's see what happens on Monday. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving them to their celebration. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear Preston laughing again. He thought the game was over. He had no idea that I had not even rolled the dice yet. The dining room was suffocatingly warm. The air conditioner hummed in the background, but it did little to dispel the heavy, oppressive atmosphere that hung over the mahogany table. This was the first dinner without Grandpa Ezekiel. His absence felt like a physical weight in the room, a void that sucked the oxygen out of the air. Yet as I walked in from the kitchen carrying a tureen of soup, I saw that the void had already been filled. Vanessa was sitting at the head of the table. She had settled into Grandpa's high-backed leather chair as if it were a throne she had been waiting years to claim. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, looking entirely too comfortable. I froze, the hot porcelain burning my fingertips. That chair was sacred. In 30 years, no one but Grandpa had ever sat there. Even when he was in the hospital, we left it empty out of respect. "You are sitting in his seat," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. Vanessa did not even look up from her phone. She waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clinking together. "The lighting is better at this end of the table, Maya. I need to get a good angle for my story. People are waiting for updates on the funeral." I set the soup down with a clatter that made everyone jump. Preston, sitting to Vanessa's right, frowned at me. He was already pouring himself a glass of Grandpa's expensive Cabernet, the bottle we had been saving for a special occasion. I suppose for them, the death of the patriarch was special enough. "Sit down, Maya," my mother said from the other end of the table. "Stop making a scene. We have had a long, emotional day. We need to eat as a family." I took my usual seat, the one furthest from the head, the spot I had occupied since I was a child. The invisible corner. As we ate in silence, the only sounds were the scraping of silverware and the notifications pinging on Vanessa's phone. I watched them. They ate with ravenous appetites. There was no mourning here. There was only the nervous energy of people waiting for the reading of a will. Mom cleared her throat, signaling the beginning of what I knew would be a lecture. She dabbed her mouth delicately with a linen napkin and looked at me with that pitying expression she had perfected over decades. "Maya, we need to talk about your future," she began. I kept my eyes on my plate. "I have a job, Mom. My future is fine." "Is it?" She sighed, a long, dramatic sound. "You are 32 years old. You are alone. You live in that small apartment in the city. Look at your sister. Vanessa has a husband. She has a reputation to uphold. She has built a life. She has a husband who is currently under investigation for fraud," I thought, but I said nothing. I just cut my meat, letting her continue. "Family is everything." Maya, Mom continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed cadence. "When your father left us, I did everything to keep us together. I took you in when I was struggling myself. I made sure you had clothes on your back. And now, in this difficult time, we need to support the members of this family who have the most to lose." I looked up then. "The most to lose? You mean Preston?" "Preston is a businessman," Mom said quickly. "He takes risks to provide for Vanessa. Sometimes things get complicated. That is why we need to be practical. We need to liquidate assets that are just sitting around doing nothing. Like this house. It always came back to the house." Preston cleared his throat and reached under his chair. He pulled out a thick leather folder and slid it across the polished wood of the table. It stopped right in front of my plate. "Since we are on the topic," Preston said, his voice smooth and condescending, "I took the liberty of preparing some paperwork. These are just standard forms for the funeral costs and the estate management. Since Mom is the executor, she has already signed everything. We just need your signature as a formality to close out the accounts and pay the funeral home." I looked at the folder. It was too thick for a funeral bill. "Just sign it," Vanessa said, finally putting her phone down. "Don't be difficult. Preston has been working on this all day to help us. You should be grateful." I opened the folder. The first page was indeed a bill from the funeral home, but underneath it were document after document of dense legal text. I adjusted my glasses. To them, I was just Maya, the quiet sister who liked math. They forgot that I spent 50 hours a week tearing apart financial statements for federal investigations. I knew how to read the fine print. I flipped past the invoice. I ignored the cover letter. I went straight to the third page, paragraph 4. My eyes scanned the text, picking out the keywords that tripped my internal alarms. Irrevocable. Power of attorney. Quitclaim. General release. This was not about funeral costs. This document transfers all my rights to the estate to you, Preston, I said, looking up. Preston chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. You are reading it wrong, sweetheart. That is just legal jargon. It just means I handle the paperwork so you do not have to worry your pretty little head about taxes and liens. It is to protect you. I looked back down at the paper. Section 4, Clause B. The undersigned hereby waives all future claims to any real property held in the name of Ezekiel Brooks. I tapped the paper with my index finger. Clause B, I read aloud. If I sign this, I am not just letting you handle the paperwork. I am giving up my claim to this house. I am giving up my share of the inheritance. And right here in Section 5, it says I agree to assume 20% of any outstanding debts associated with the estate management. I looked at Preston. His smile was faltering. You are trying to transfer your debts to the estate, aren't you? I asked. You want to sell the house to pay your margin call? And you want me to sign a document that says I am liable for the fees? The room went silent again. This time, it was a dangerous silence. You do not know what you are talking about, Vanessa snapped. Preston is a financial advisor. You are just a gloried calculator. Just sign the damn paper, Maya. No, I said, firmly closing the folder. I am not signing anything. Not until my own lawyer looks at it. Mom slammed her hand on the table. Your lawyer? Since when do you have a lawyer? You are acting like an enemy. Maya, we are your family. Your sister needs this money, so it is about the money, I said. You just admitted it. It is not about protecting me. It is about bailing Preston out of his gambling debts. Don't you dare call my investments gambling. Preston shouted, his face turning red. You are short-selling volatile tech stocks with money you do not have. Preston, I replied calmly. In my line of work, we call that a one-way ticket to federal prison. That was the breaking point. Vanessa stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure, ugly rage. She grabbed her wine glass, the crystal goblet filled with the dark red vintage Cabernet. You selfish little brat, she screamed. Before I could move, she hurled the contents of the glass across the table. The cold liquid hit me squarely in the chest. It splashed up onto my neck and face, stinging my eyes. I gasped, the smell of alcohol filling my nose. I looked down. The expensive red wine was soaking into my black funeral dress, looking like a fresh, gaping wound. My mother did not gasp. She did not scold Vanessa. She just sat there watching me with cold, hard eyes. You always ruin everything, Vanessa hissed, her breathing heavy. You ruined this dinner. You ruined Grandpa's funeral. And now you want to ruin my life. I took a napkin and slowly wiped the wine from my cheek. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. You are wrong, Vanessa, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I did not ruin anything. But if you think a splash of wine is going to make me sign that paper, you have severely underestimated me. You want Grandpa to rest in peace? Vanessa sneered, leaning over the table. Then do what you are told. If you do not sign that paper by tomorrow morning, you will wish you had never been born into this family. I stood up, clutching the wine-soaked napkin. I looked at the three of them, the vultures picking at the carcass of a man they never truly loved. I am going to my room, I said. And Preston, if you try to forge my signature, I will have the FBI at your door before the ink dries. I turned and walked away, the wine dripping from my dress onto the floor. Behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering against the wall. They were terrified. And they should be, because they had just declared war on the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. The water ran ice cold over my hands as I scrubbed at the red stain on my dress. I stood in the guest bathroom, The one with the vintage clawfoot tub that Grandpa Ezekiel had installed himself 50 years ago. The smell of stale Cabernet Sauvignon filled the small tiled room, mixing with the scent of lavender soap. It made me nauseous. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. The wine had splashed across my chest and up onto my neck, leaving a jagged, dark mark that looked disturbingly like a bruise. Or a wound. My hands were shaking not from the cold water, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heart rate. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I was not 32 years old, standing in a bathroom, while my family plotted against me. I was 12 years old again, sitting on the front porch with Grandpa. I remembered that day clearly. I had come home crying because a shopkeeper in town had followed me around the store, accusing me of stealing candy simply because I had put my hands in my pockets. Grandpa had wiped my tears with his rough, calloused thumb. He did not tell me it was okay. He did not tell me to ignore it. He lifted my chin until I was looking him in the eye. Maya, he had said, his voice low and rumbling like thunder. The world will try to tell you that you are less. They will try to make you feel small so they can feel big. But you remember this. You own the ground you walk on. Do not ever let them see you bleed. And if you do bleed, you make sure you bleed standing up. I opened my eyes. The reflection in the mirror was older, harder, and tired, but the eyes were the same. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on a towel. I would not let them see me bleed. Not tonight. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out into the hallway. I intended to go straight upstairs to my old bedroom, lock the door, and call my contact at the bank. But I did not make it to the stairs. Preston was leaning against the wall in the hallway, blocking my path. He had loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top button of his dress shirt. To anyone else, he might have looked like a tired executive after a long day, but to me, he looked like a predator waiting in the tall grass. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single sconce casting long shadows across his face. "Feeling better?" he asked. His voice was smooth, stripped of the anger he had shown in the dining room. It was almost conversational, which made it terrifying. "Move, Preston," I said, keeping my voice flat. He didn't move. Instead, he took a slow step toward me. He was a tall man, over 6 feet, and he knew how to use his size. In the narrow hallway, he took up all the space, forcing me to back up until my heels hit the bathroom door frame. "You know, Maya," he said, putting his hands in his pockets. "I have been thinking. You are under a lot of stress. Grief makes people act irrationally. It makes them paranoid." "I am not the one who needs to sell a house to pay off illegal debts," I replied, refusing to look away. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet house. "See, that is what I mean. You are hysterical. You are making up stories, and I worry about how that looks. You know, a single woman, no husband, no real social standing, suddenly making wild accusations against a respected family." He took another step. He was close enough now that I could smell the expensive cologne he wore to mask the scent of his fear. "I have friends in this town, Maya," he whispered, leaning down slightly. "Judge Henderson, Sheriff Miller. We play golf every Sunday. They know me. They know I am a good man. A family man." He let the silence hang there, heavy with implication. He was not just listing his friends, he was drawing a line in the sand. He was reminding me of the unspoken rules of this society. He was the white, wealthy investment banker with the connections. I was the black, unmarried woman with an attitude. In his mind, his word would always weigh more than mine. "If I call the sheriff and tell him you are trespassing, Preston," continued, his voice dropping to a murmur, "if I tell him you are mentally unstable and harassing my wife, who do you think he will believe, the grieving sister trying to hold her family together, or the aggressive intruder who refuses to leave?" My stomach churned. This was a microaggression sharpened into a weapon. He was using the systemic bias that Grandpa had warned me about. He was threatening to use the police, the law, and his privilege to crush me if I did not fall in line. "You are threatening me in my grandfather's house," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "It is not your grandfather's house anymore," he said coldly. "It is an asset, and I am the manager of that asset. You are just a liability." He reached out and brushed a piece of lint off my shoulder. I flinched, pulling away from his touch as if he were burning hot. "Don't touch me," I snapped. "See?" He smiled, stepping back but still blocking the path. "So aggressive. You really should work on that temper, Maya. It won't get you far in life. Now go upstairs, pack your bags. I want you out by tomorrow morning. If you are still here when the realtor arrives, I will make that call to Sheriff Miller. And I promise you, you won't like how that ends." He held my gaze for one last second, his blue eyes empty of any empathy, before turning and walking back toward the dining room. He walked with the confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. I stood there in the dim hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase after him and tear that smug look off his face. But I knew that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to lose control. He wanted to paint me as the villain so he could justify erasing me. I forced myself to take a breath. 1, 2, 3. "I am not a victim," I whispered to the empty hallway. "I am a hunter." I turned and walked up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy. I reached my bedroom door, the room where I had spent my teenage years, dreaming of becoming someone important, someone powerful. I opened the door and stepped inside, locking it behind me. I leaned against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I needed a plan. I needed to move faster than they expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my colleague or maybe a spam email. It was a notification from the security app I had installed on my phone 2 days ago. I had hidden a small wireless camera on the bookshelf in Grandpa's study, tucked between his old encyclopedias. It was my insurance policy. The notification on the screen was red. "Device offline. Connection lost." My blood ran cold. I tapped the screen, trying to refresh the feed, but it was just static. They were in the study. They must have found the camera, or maybe they had just cut the Wi-Fi to the whole house to stop me from listening. I scrambled to my feet. If they found the camera, they would know I was watching. But more importantly, if they were in the study right now with the door closed and the internet cut, it meant they were doing something they did not want anyone to see. They were opening the safe. I grabbed my laptop bag and checked the battery. It was full. I did not have time to cry. I did not have time to be afraid of Preston and his sheriff friends. I had to get downstairs. I had to get into that safe before they destroyed the only thing that could save me. I unlocked my bedroom door and stepped back out into the dark hallway. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I moved toward the stairs, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. The game had changed. They were not just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to erase the truth, and I was the only one left to protect it. 3 in the morning is a ghost hour. It is the time when the world is stripped of its pretense, leaving only silence and shadows. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a betrayal. My body was exhausted, aching from the tension of the dinner and the confrontation with Preston, but my mind was wired with a high-voltage alert. I knew I could not sleep. If I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa throwing that wine. If I drifted off, I heard Preston's threats about the sheriff. I checked my phone again. The security camera feed was still dead. That black screen was taunting me. It was proof that they had already begun their invasion of the one room Grandpa had kept sacred. If Preston had found the camera, he had likely torn the study apart, looking for what I knew was hidden there. I threw the covers off. The air in the bedroom was cold, but I did not reach for a robe. I needed to move fast, and I needed to be silent. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet touching the hardwood floor. I knew this house better than anyone. I knew which board on the landing whined if you stepped on it. I knew how to navigate the spiral staircase without making a sound. I had spent my childhood sneaking down to the kitchen for midnight snacks or to watch Grandpa work late into the night. Now I was sneaking down to save his legacy. I opened my bedroom door with agonizing slowness, timing the movement to the rhythm of the wind rattling the window panes. The hallway was pitch black. I didn't dare turn on the flashlight on my phone. I let my eyes adjust, guiding myself by the faint moonlight spilling in from the skylight above the stairs. The house felt different tonight. It felt hostile. It was no longer the sanctuary where I had grown up. It was occupied territory. I reached the bottom of the stairs and pressed my back against the wall, listening. Silence. No snoring from the guest room where Preston and Vanessa were staying. No movement from my mother's suite. Just the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. I moved like a shadow toward the study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had they left it open? Or was someone inside? I held my breath and peered through the crack. The room was empty. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me, engaging the lock with a soft click. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, keeping the beam low, aiming it at the floor. The room was a disaster. Books were pulled off the shelves. Drawers were left hanging open. Papers were scattered across the Persian rug like fallen leaves. It made my blood boil. They had no respect. They had ransacked a dead man's private thoughts looking for a quick payday. I stepped over a pile of encyclopedias and went straight to the large painting of the California coastline that hung behind the desk. I gripped the frame and swung it outward. Behind it was the wall safe. My breath caught in my throat. The steel face of the safe was scarred. Deep, ugly scratches marred the metal around the dial. There was a small, erratic hole drilled near the locking mechanism, but it didn't go all the way through. I ran my fingers over the damage. Metal shavings fell onto the carpet. Preston. He had tried to drill it. He must have spent hours down here while we were at the funeral parlor trying to brute force his way in. He was desperate, and he was sloppy. He had failed, which meant the locking pins were still engaged. But the damage was severe. If he came back with a professional locksmith or a bigger drill, he would get in. I had maybe minutes before he woke up and tried again. I knelt in front of the safe. I needed the combination. Most people use birthdays or anniversaries. Preston had probably tried all of those. Grandpa's birthday, my grandmother's death date, Vanessa's wedding anniversary. But Grandpa Ezekiel was not a sentimental man in that way. He was a trucker. He was a man of the road. He trusted coordinates and mileage more than he trusted dates. I turned away from the safe and scanned the messy bookshelves. I was looking for something specific, something Preston would have overlooked because he saw it as trash. There on the bottom shelf, shoved behind a row of pristine law books, was a tattered leather-bound notebook. The spine was cracked, and the leather was stained with grease and coffee rings. I pulled it out. The smell hit me instantly, diesel fuel, peppermint, and old paper. It was Grandpa's first logbook. The one he kept when he bought his very first 18-wheeler back in the 70s. I opened it, the pages crinkling softly. I remembered sitting on his lap when I was 6 years old, tracing the lines of his handwriting. He used to tell me, "Maya, you can lose your way in life, but you can never lose your way on a map if you write down where you have been." I flipped to the very last page of the logbook. It wasn't a log entry. It was a drawing. A sketch of his first truck, the Iron Lady. And underneath the drawing, written in his jagged, heavy hand, were 3 license plate numbers. He had owned 3 trucks in his life before he started the company. I knew the story. He always said the combination to his success was remembering every mile he drove in those 3 trucks. I looked at the numbers. 482 CAB 991H UL 305 WST. Preston would have seen these as random scribbles. But I saw the code. I went back to the safe. The dial was cold under my fingers. I prayed the drill hadn't jammed the tumblers. I spun the dial to the right. 4, 8, 2. I spun it to the left. 9, 9, 1. I spun it back to the right. 3, 0, 5. I held my breath and gripped the handle. I pulled. Clunk. The heavy steel door swung open. I let out a silent sob of relief. I shone the light inside. It was empty of cash. There were no stacks of $100 bills, no gold bars. That was what Preston was looking for. He wanted liquidity. He wanted something he could steal and spend immediately. Instead, sitting alone on the velvet-lined shelf was a small silver USB drive and a heavy brass object. I reached in and took them. The brass object was his corporate seal, the original embosser from when he incorporated Brooks Logistics 40 years ago. It was the symbol of his authority. And the USB drive, I knew what was on it. The trust, the video testimony, the evidence that would bury Preston and save the estate. I shoved the items deep into the pocket of my pajama pants. I had what I needed. I had the keys to the kingdom. Now I just needed to close the safe and get out. I reached for the handle to swing the door shut. Creak. I froze. The sound came from the ceiling directly above me, the hallway upstairs. Thump. A footstep. Heavy. Deliberate. Thump. Thump. Someone was walking down the stairs. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I looked at the safe. If I slammed it shut, the metal clank would echo through the silent house like a gunshot. If I left it open, they would know I had been here. They would know I had the contents. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. They were not heading to the kitchen. They were coming toward the study. I killed the light on my phone, plunging the room back into darkness. I scrambled backward, crawling under the heavy mahogany desk. I curled myself into a tight ball, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound of my breathing. The doorknob turned. The door creaked open wider this time. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the room. It illuminated the scattered papers, the overturned chair, and finally it landed on the painting I had swung open. The light stopped on the open safe. "Well, well," a voice whispered. It was Preston. And he didn't sound angry. He sounded amused. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hand clutching the USB drive in my pocket so hard the edges dug into my skin. He was 5 feet away from me. If he looked under the desk, it was over. The physical confrontation I had avoided at dinner would happen right now in the dark with no witnesses. "Looks like we have a little mouse in the house," he said softly, stepping into the room. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. The game of cat and mouse had turned into a hunt, and I was trapped in the cage. I pressed my body flat against the cold wall behind the heavy velvet drapes. Dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight that cut through the gap, but I did not dare to breathe. The footsteps I had heard on the stairs grew louder, heavy, and frantic. I had managed to scramble from under the desk to the window just seconds before the door handle turned, but my heart was still hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room again, but the voice that followed was not Preston's. Oh my God, it was my mother. Her voice was a shrill, piercing shriek that shattered the silence of the house. "We have been robbed! Preston, Vanessa, wake up. Someone has broken in." She had seen the safe. From my hiding spot, I could hear her rushing toward the open metal door, her hands slapping against the empty shelves. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying she would not check behind the curtains. The house erupted into chaos. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs as Preston and Vanessa ran to join her. I heard Preston cursing, the sound of furniture being overturned and the frantic accusations being thrown back and forth. They argued for an hour. They blamed the locksmith. They blamed the neighbors. But eventually, the adrenaline faded into exhausted confusion, and they retreated upstairs to call the police in the morning, convinced a burglar had beaten them to the treasure. I waited another 30 minutes in the suffocating darkness before slipping out, creeping back to my room like a ghost in the house I grew up in. I did not sleep. I lay in bed fully clothed, clutching the USB drive and the corporate seal under my pillow, waiting for the sun to rise. I knew the reprieve would not last. They were desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. The attack came at 7 in the morning. There was no knock. The door to my bedroom exploded open, slamming against the wall with a violence that shook the picture frames. I sat up, feigning sleep, but Vanessa was already on me. She looked deranged. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, her silk robe hung loosely around her shoulders, and her eyes were wild with a mixture of panic and rage. "Where is it?" she screamed, marching toward the bed. "Get out of my room, Vanessa," I said, throwing the covers aside. She did not listen. She grabbed the handle of my suitcase, which was sitting on the bench at the foot of the bed, and upended it. My clothes, my toiletries, and my notebooks cascaded onto the floor in a heap. "You took it!" she yelled, kicking through my folded shirts. "You are the only one who knew the combination. You little thief! Give me the money!" She was tearing through my things like a wild animal. She grabbed a silk blouse, one I had bought with my first big bonus check, and ripped the buttons off as she checked the pockets. The sound of tearing fabric snapped something inside me. I jumped out of bed and grabbed her wrist. "Stop it!" I shouted, shoving her back. "There was no money in that safe, Vanessa, liar." She shrieked, stumbling back, but regaining her balance quickly. She lunged at me, her fingernails raking across my arm. Grandpa did not trust banks. He kept cash, hundreds of thousands. I know he did. And you stole it because you want to see me fail. She pushed me hard, and I stumbled against the dresser. This was the first time my sister had ever laid hands on me. We had fought with words for decades, but this physical violence was a new, terrifying low. It showed me exactly how much power Preston's debt held over her. "You are pathetic," I spat, straightening my shirt. "You think Grandpa left piles of cash for you? You think he would reward you for ignoring him for 10 years? He loved me." Vanessa screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of mottled red. "I was his first grandchild. I was the one he showed off at church. He showed you off because you were pretty, Vanessa," I said, my voice cold and steady. "But he took me on the road. Do you remember that? Or were you too busy fixing your hair?" Vanessa froze. The mention of the road trips hit a nerve. It was the ancient wound between us, the root of all this rot. When we were children, Grandpa Ezekiel would fire up his big rig, the Iron Lady, and ask who wanted to go on a haul. Vanessa always refused. She said the truck was loud, dirty, and smelled like diesel. She wanted to stay home and play dress up. But I would grab my backpack and climb into the passenger seat, happy to sit in silence and watch him work. "He took you because he felt sorry for you," Vanessa spat, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. "Because you were the weird, quiet kid with no friends. Mom made him take you so she did not have to deal with you for a week." "He took me because I listened," I countered, stepping into her space. "Because I learned how to read a map. I learned how to log miles. I learned how to run a business while you were learning how to marry a rich husband. And look where that got you. You are tearing apart your sister's luggage, looking for phantom money to save a husband who is lying to you." "Do not talk about Preston," she yelled, grabbing my heavy winter coat from the pile on the floor. She began patting down the pockets of the coat frantically. It was the coat I had worn the day I met with the trust attorney 3 days ago. My stomach dropped. I had forgotten to clear the pockets. Vanessa's hand froze. She felt something inside the inner lining. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face, transforming her features into something predatory. "What is this?" she whispered. She pulled out a small, thick card. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering. I lunged for it, but she was faster. She danced back out of reach, holding the card up to the light. She read the name aloud, her voice dripping with venom. "Arthur Jenkins, attorney at law, specializing in estate planning and living trusts." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a misunderstanding that was about to cost her everything. She thought she had found a smoking gun. She thought this proved I was conspiring to steal the inheritance, not realizing this card belonged to the man who already controlled it. So she laughed, a high, manic sound. "You have been plotting this, haven't you? You went to see a lawyer before Grandpa was even in the ground. You are trying to contest the will." "Give me the card, Vanessa," I warned, my voice low. "You do not know what you are doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I am doing. she said, backing toward the door, clutching the card like a trophy. You think you are so smart, Maya? You think you can outmaneuver Mom and Preston? You are just a sad, lonely accountant. This card proves you are trying to defraud the estate. She opened the door, turning back to give me one last look of pure hatred. I am going to call this Mr. Jenkins right now, she hissed. I am going to tell him his client is a thief, and then I am going to call the sheriff. You better hope you have a good lawyer, little sister. Because by noon you won't just be homeless, you will be in handcuffs. She slammed the door, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my room. My clothes were torn, my secrets were exposed, and my sister was marching downstairs to make a phone call that would trigger the end of the world. I stood there listening to her footsteps fade. A strange calm settled over me. She was going to call Arthur Jenkins. She thought she was calling the police on me. She had no idea she was about to call the executioner on herself. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the USB drive. I stroked the cool metal with my thumb. Go ahead, Vanessa, I whispered to the empty room. Make the call. Let the war begin. The red and blue lights were not just flashing against the walls of my grandfather's living room. They were slicing through the dignity of the home he had built, turning a sanctuary into a crime scene. I stood by the fireplace, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the performance of a lifetime. Preston was standing in the foyer, wiping fake tears from his eyes. He was talking to a police officer, a tall, thick-set man with a buzz cut and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. I recognized him immediately. It was Officer Miller, the man Preston played golf with every Sunday at the country club. The man Preston had threatened me with just hours ago. It is a vintage Rolex, Officer Preston was saying, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. A submariner. Gold face. It was Ezekiel's most prized possession. He wanted to be buried with it, but we decided to keep it as a family heirloom. I went to check the safe this morning and it was gone. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is the only one who has been in the study, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She broke into the safe last night. We heard her. And now the watch is missing. Officer Miller turned his gaze toward me. There was no investigation in his eyes, only a conclusion. He adjusted his belt, his hand resting casually near his holster, and walked toward me. The heavy thud of his boots on the hardwood floor sounded like a countdown. Ma'am, Officer Miller said, his voice flat and hard. I need you to empty your pockets and step away from the fireplace. I did not move. I looked from Preston's smug face to the officer's stony expression. This was the trap. They couldn't find the USB drive or the seal because I had hidden them in the ventilation duct behind my bed an hour ago. So they were pivoting. They were planting a theft charge to get me arrested, to get me out of the house so they could tear it apart. Officer Miller, isn't it? I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline racing through my veins. My grandfather did not own a Rolex. He was a truck driver. He wore a Timex Indiglo that he bought at a truck stop in Nevada for $30. He called Rolexes vanity weights for men who did not work with their hands. Preston stepped forward, quickly cutting me off. He bought it as an investment, Maya. You did not know everything about him. He kept it hidden. Just like he kept that cash hidden that you stole. Officer Miller stepped into my personal space. He was close enough that I could see the pores on his nose. He was trying to intimidate me using his size and his badge to force submission. I am not going to ask you again, he said, his voice dropping an octave. We have a credible witness stating you accessed the safe. Now you can empty your pockets voluntarily, or I can arrest you for obstruction and grand larceny, and we can do a full search down at the station. And I promise you, the search at the station is a lot less comfortable than the one here. My mother and Vanessa were standing on the stairs watching. Vanessa looked triumphant. Mom looked away, unable to watch her daughter being treated like a criminal, but unwilling to stop it. I looked Officer Miller in the eye. I knew the game. If I resisted, they would tackle me. If I complied, they would plant the watch on me during the search or claim they found it in my pocket. I needed to change the battlefield. I have not left the house, I said slowly. So if I stole this imaginary watch, it must be on me, right? Or in my room. That is a fair assumption, Miller said. Then you won't mind if we check the footage first, I said. Preston frowned. What footage? You said the camera in the study was offline. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. The camera inside the study is offline. I agreed. But my car is parked in the driveway. It is a Tesla Preston. You know, the one you made fun of because you said electric cars were for liberals. I turned to Officer Miller. My car has Sentry mode. It records 360 degrees of video whenever it detects motion or whenever I trigger it remotely. It has been recording high-definition video of the front of this house, the living room window, and the driveway for the last 48 hours. I pulled my phone out of my pocket before Miller could stop me. I tapped the app and held the screen up. If I had taken a gold Rolex out of that study, or if I had gone out to my car to hide it, the camera would have seen it. But that is not what the camera saw. I pressed play. The video on the screen was crisp. It showed the view through the large bay window of the study. It was from 2 days ago. It showed Preston entering the study. He was not looking at papers. He was holding a small black velvet box. He placed it on the desk, took a photo of it, and then put it back in his pocket. That is interesting, I said, narrating the video for the officer. That looks like Preston bringing a jewelry box into the study, staging a photo, and then removing it. Why would he take a photo of a watch he claims was locked in a safe, maybe for insurance fraud, or maybe to establish proof of existence for an item that was never there? Preston's face went white. That proves nothing, he sputtered. I was appraising it. Officer Miller looked at the video, then at Preston. The dynamic in the room shifted. Miller was corrupt, sure, but he was not stupid. He knew that digital evidence was sticky. If he arrested me now and this video came out in court, he would be helping a man commit insurance fraud. His pension was worth more to him than Preston's friendship. Miller took a step back from me. He cleared his throat, adjusting his belt again. Mr. Brooks, he said, his tone significantly less friendly. You said the watch was in the safe until this morning. It was, Preston insisted, but his voice cracked. The video shows you removing it 2 days ago, Miller said. If it is missing, you were the last one seen with it. It is a misunderstanding, Preston said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. I must have moved it and forgotten. Yes, that is it. The stress of the funeral. Miller looked at me. He didn't apologize. He didn't step back to give me space. He just nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. Civil matter, he grunted. If the watch shows up, call us. But don't waste police resources on family squabbles, Preston. Miller turned and walked out the front door without another word. The heavy silence rushed back into the room, more suffocating than before. Vanessa ran upstairs, sobbing. Mom retreated to the kitchen, unable to face the wreckage. I was left alone with Preston. He didn't look defeated. He looked dangerous. The mask of the grieving brother-in-law was completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a man who had been cornered. He walked over to me. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his hand. He leaned in close, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. He smelled of fear and expensive scotch. You got lucky, Maya. He whispered, his voice a low hiss that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You think you are clever with your cameras and your little technical tricks, but you cannot record everything. He glanced at the front door where the police had just exited, then looked back at me with dead, cold eyes. Next time it won't be a watch, he said softly. Next time I will plant a bag of fentanyl in the trunk of that fancy car of yours. And I will make an anonymous call to the state troopers. Possession with intent to distribute, mandatory minimum sentences. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. So go ahead. Keep playing detective. But unless you want to rot in a federal cell for 20 years, I suggest you sign those papers. He patted my shoulder, a mockery of affection, and walked up the stairs, leaving me standing in the foyer, shivering despite the heat. The game had just stopped being about money. Now it was about my life. The silence in the house after Officer Miller left was heavier than the grave we had just left Grandpa in. I sat in the window seat of the upstairs hallway, watching the police cruiser disappear down the long tree-lined driveway. My hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from a rage that was slowly hardening into something cold and unbreakable. Preston had shown his hand. He was willing to plant drugs on me. He was willing to send me to prison to cover his own failures. I heard the soft click of a door opening down the hall. I didn't turn around. I knew the footsteps. They were light, hesitant, the rhythm of someone who walked on eggshells only when they wanted something. Maya. It was my mother, Louise. She stood at the end of the hallway, holding a tray with a cup of tea. Her eyes were red-rimmed with dark circles that made her look 10 years older than she was. For a brief, foolish second, I felt a pang of sympathy. She had just buried her father-in-law, and now her family was imploding. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. Just for a minute, I nodded, gesturing to the empty armchair opposite the window seat. She set the tray down on the small table between us. The steam from the tea curled into the air, smelling of chamomile and deception. "I know Preston was harsh today," she began, sitting down and wringing her hands in her lap. "He is under so much pressure, Maya. You have to understand. The market is volatile. He is terrified of losing everything he has built for your sister. He threatened to plant fentanyl in my car." "Mom," I said, my voice flat, "that is not pressure. That is criminal intent. He didn't mean it," she said quickly, reaching out to touch my knee. I pulled my leg back. "He is just scared. Men do foolish things when they are scared. But we are family. We have to protect each other." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the desperate tilt of her head, the way her lips trembled. "You mean I have to protect him?" I corrected. "You want me to sign the papers. You want me to let him sell Grandpa's house so he can pay off his gambling debts." "It is not gambling," she insisted, though her eyes shifted away. "It is business. And yes, I want you to sign, because if you do not, he will go down. And if he goes down, he takes Vanessa with him. Do you want your sister to be homeless? Do you want her to suffer?" "I want her to be an adult," I said. "I want her to face the consequences of marrying a fraud. Why is their comfort more important than Grandpa's wishes? He told me specifically he wanted this house to stay in the family." She let out a sharp, frustrated sigh, dropping the facade of the grieving grandmother. "Grandpa is dead, Maya. His wishes died with him. We are the ones who have to live in the real world. And in the real world, Preston is the future of this family. He has connections. He has status. And what am I?" I asked the question hanging in the air between us. "What am I to you, Mom? I am the one who took care of Grandpa when he got sick. I am the one who drove him to his appointments. I am the one who has a clean record and a successful career. Why am I always the one who has to sacrifice for them?" Louise looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the mask completely fall away. There was no pity in her eyes. There was no motherly concern. There was only a deep, simmering resentment that looked like it had been boiling for 30 years. "Because you are not one of us," she whispered. The words were quiet, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. I froze. "What? You heard me," she said, her voice gaining strength, becoming harder. "You are not my daughter, Maya. You never were." I stared at her, my mind reeling. I looked for a sign that she was lying, that she was just trying to hurt me, but her face was stone cold. "Your father," she spat the word out like a curse, "came home one night 3 years into our marriage. He was crying. He told me he had made a mistake with a waitress at a diner in Oakland. She had dropped a baby off at his workshop and vanished. That baby was you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The hallway, the window, the cup of tea, everything blurred. "I wanted to leave," she continued, her voice trembling with the memory of an old humiliation. "I wanted to divorce him right then and there. But I couldn't. My family was prominent. The scandal would have destroyed us. So I made a deal. I told him I would stay. I told him I would raise you. But I told him I would never love you. I sat there paralyzed. Flashbacks of my childhood raced through my mind like a movie on fast forward. The way she never held my hand in public. The way there were dozens of photo albums of Vanessa, but only a handful of pictures of me. The way she always looked at me with that vague, distant annoyance, as if I were a stain on her perfect carpet that she couldn't quite scrub out. I did my duty, she said, sitting back in the chair, looking almost relieved to finally say it. I fed you. I clothed you. I put a roof over your head. I kept my promise to your father. But I do not owe you anything else, Maya, especially not now. Vanessa is my flesh and blood. Preston is the man she chose. They are my legacy. You are just a reminder of the worst time in my life. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging. But they didn't fall. I wouldn't let them fall. So that is why I whispered. That is why you are letting them steal the inheritance. That is why you watched Vanessa throw wine on me and said nothing. Because in your eyes I am just a trespasser. In my eyes you are lucky to have the last name Brooks at all, she said coldly. If it weren't for me, you would have been in the foster system. So do not talk to me about fairness. You have taken enough from this family. Now sign the papers and pay us back for 30 years of charity. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, looking down at me with disdain. You have until the morning, she said. If you do not sign, I will testify against you. I will tell the police you stole the watch. I will tell them you are unstable. And I will make sure you lose your job, your reputation, and your freedom. I protected you from the world because I had to. But I do not have to protect you anymore. She turned and walked away, her footsteps retreating down the hall, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for a long time. The tea on the table had gone cold. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the hallway in shadow. I should have been devastated. I should have been broken. The woman I had called Mom for 32 years had just told me I was a mistake she regretted. But as I sat there, a strange sensation washed over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. It wasn't grief. It was relief. It was the feeling of a heavy chain finally snapping. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn her love. I had tried to be perfect. I had tried to be smart, successful, quiet, helpful. I had tortured myself wondering why I wasn't enough, why I couldn't make her smile the way Vanessa did. Now I knew. It wasn't because I was flawed. It was because I was never hers. The obligation was gone. The guilt was gone. The family duty she had tried to use to manipulate me was dust in the wind. I stood up. I walked over to the mirror hanging on the wall at the end of the hall. I looked at my reflection. I saw my father's eyes. I saw Grandpa Ezekiel's determination. And I saw a woman who owed these people absolutely nothing. I wiped the single tear that had managed to escape down my cheek. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a house that was no longer my prison. Thank you, Louise, I whispered to the empty hallway. You just gave me the one thing I was missing. You gave me permission to destroy you. I walked back to my room, my steps firm and steady. I didn't lock the door this time. I didn't need to hide. I pulled my phone out and dialed the number on the business card. Vanessa had tried to steal the number for Arthur Jenkins, the trust attorney. It was late, but I knew he would answer. The war had officially begun. And for the first time, I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting for my victory. The engine of my Tesla hummed quietly as I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the suffocating atmosphere of the Brooks family estate behind me. I did not speed. I did not drive erratically. I drove with the precision of a woman who finally had a clear objective. My mother's confession had been painful, yes, but it was also a liberation. I was no longer bound by the invisible chains of seeking their approval. I was free to do what I did best. I was free to hunt. I drove into town and parked in front of a 24-hour coffee shop called the Night Owl. It was a place for students and insomniacs, filled with the smell of roasted beans and the quiet tapping of keyboards. I ordered a black coffee, found a booth in the back corner away from the windows, and opened my laptop. Preston thought I was just a bookkeeper. He thought I spent my days balancing checkbooks and filing tax returns. He had no idea that for the past 5 years I had been contracting with federal agencies to track down assets for high-level fraud cases. I knew how to follow money through shell companies' offshore accounts and encrypted ledgers. Preston was a small-time con artist playing in a big league, and he had made the fatal mistake of threatening a professional. I cracked my knuckles and began to work. The first layer was easy. I pulled up public records from the county clerk's database. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the truth about Preston's success. The beautiful colonial house he and Vanessa lived in was not theirs. It was leveraged to the hilt. There were 3 liens against the property. He had taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago and a third one just 6 months ago. He was drowning in debt, paying off one loan with the proceeds of another. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter liquid sharpening my focus. I moved on to his credit report. It was a disaster of maxed-out cards and missed payments. But this was just standard financial incompetence. It did not explain the desperation. It did not explain why he was willing to plant drugs in my car to get a quick sale on Grandpa's house. I needed to go deeper. I activated my VPN and accessed a few databases that were not exactly open to the public. These were the tools of my trade, the gray areas where forensic accountants looked for the shadows money left behind. I started cross-referencing Preston's phone number and social security number with known high-risk lending platforms. And there it was. The screen illuminated my face with the cold blue light of revelation. Preston had not just made bad stock picks. He had been gambling. Not at a casino, but on unregulated crypto exchange platforms that promised massive returns and delivered nothing but ruin. He had lost $200,000 in a single week. But the money he lost wasn't his. I traced the deposits. He had been moving money from his clients' accounts into his personal trading fund. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, clumsy and desperate. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now Paul was coming to collect. I found the final piece of the puzzle on a dark web forum used for debt collection discussions. Preston's name wasn't there, but his handle was. I matched the IP address. He had borrowed $50,000 from a loan shark in Las Vegas to try and cover his tracks. The repayment date was this Friday, 2 days from now. I sat back in the booth, letting out a long breath. It all made sense. The frantic need to sell Grandpa's house. The fake power of attorney. The threats. Preston needed cash by Friday, or he was a dead man walking. The loan sharks would break his legs, and his firm would send him to federal prison for embezzlement. He was cornered, and a cornered animal bites. I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. In New York, the compliance officers at Preston's investment firm would be logging in within a few hours. I opened a new window and composed an email. I did not use my own name. I used a secure, anonymous server. Subject: urgent compliance violation. Internal embezzlement alert. I attached the PDFs of the transfer logs I had just uncovered. I attached the screenshots of his crypto losses. I laid out the timeline of his theft, highlighting the specific client accounts he had drained. It was a forensic masterpiece. It was cold, factual, and undeniable. It would trigger an immediate internal audit. His accounts would be frozen by noon. I hovered my mouse over the send button. For a moment I hesitated. Not out of mercy for Preston, but for Vanessa. If I sent this her life as she knew, it was over. The country club memberships, the designer clothes, the illusion of the perfect marriage, it would all be incinerated. She would be the wife of a felon. Then I remembered the wine splashing against my chest. I remembered her tearing through my clothes. I remembered her standing by while Preston threatened my freedom. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the lie over her own sister. I clicked send. The screen refreshed. Message sent. I closed my laptop and finished my coffee. It was done. I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and tossed it into his lap. Now I just had to go back and watch the explosion. I drove back to the estate as the sun was beginning to crest over the hills. The house looked peaceful in the morning light, a grand old structure that held too many secrets. I parked my car and walked inside. The house was quiet. They were likely still asleep, dreaming of the money they thought they would get from selling this place. I went to the kitchen and started making breakfast. I brewed a pot of coffee. I fried bacon. I wanted the smell to wake them up. I wanted everything to seem normal. Around 8 o'clock a.m., Preston came down the stairs. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot and he was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. He glared at me as he poured himself a mug of coffee. "Still here," he grunted. "I thought you would be packing." "I'm just having breakfast, Preston," I said, buttering a piece of toast. "You should eat. You are going to have a long day." He sneered at me and pulled his phone out of his pocket to check his emails. I watched him over the rim of my mug. I saw the exact moment the bomb went off. His face went slack. The color drained from his skin so fast, it looked like he had seen a ghost. His hand started to shake, the coffee in his mug sloshing over the sides, burning his fingers. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Preston Vanessa called out, coming down the stairs in her silk robe. "What is wrong?" Preston dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor, sending ceramic shards and hot coffee everywhere. He didn't even notice. He was staring at his phone screen with wide, terrified eyes. "They locked me out," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "They locked me out of the system. My credentials, they are revoked." "Who?" Vanessa asked, rushing to him. "Who locked you out?" "The firm," he screamed, throwing his phone across the room. It smashed into the wall, cracking the screen. "The compliance officer just emailed me. They are launching an audit. They froze my assets, Vanessa. They froze everything." He grabbed his hair, pacing the kitchen like a madman. "How did they know?" he yelled, kicking a chair over. "Nobody knew I covered my tracks." "How did they find out today?" I took another bite of my toast, the crunch echoing in the silent kitchen. The sound made Preston stop pacing. He slowly turned his head to look at me. "You," he whispered. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, calm and composed. "You did this," he roared, lunging toward the table. "You hacked me. You ruined me." "Preston, stop!" Vanessa screamed, grabbing his arm. "You are scaring me. What is going on? What audit? Get off me!" He shoved her away hard. Vanessa stumbled back against the counter, clutching her chest. I stood up then. I was not afraid anymore. "I did not hack you, Preston," I said coolly. "I just shined a light on what you were already doing. Embezzlement is a felony. And based on the email I just sent to your boss, you are looking at 15 to 20 years. You sent it." Vanessa gasped, looking at me with horror. "You told his boss I warned you," I said, picking up my plate. "I told you not to touch Grandpa's legacy. You thought you could bully me because I was quiet. You forgot that I am the one who counts the beans." Preston's phone, now lying cracked on the floor, began to ring. Then it stopped. Then it rang again immediately. Then Vanessa's phone started ringing. "That will be the partners," I said. "Or maybe the FBI. You might want to answer that." Preston looked at the phone, then at me, and then he grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the center of the table and hurled it through the kitchen window. The glass shattered outward, a violent explosion of noise that marked the end of his carefully constructed life. He fell to his knees, sobbing. I walked past him, stepping over the broken glass, and headed toward the front door. I had one more stop to make. I had destroyed the enemy inside the house. Now it was time to bring in the reinforcements to secure the victory. The transformation of the house was terrifying in its efficiency. Only hours ago, Preston had been on his knees screaming amidst shattered glass, a man undone by the prospect of prison. But by 5 in the evening, the shards of the crystal vase had been swept away. The smell of stale fear and coffee was replaced by the rich, savory aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary. The lights were dimmed to a warm, inviting glow, casting a soft haze over the furniture. that we all knew was hours away from being liquidated. It was a performance, and the curtain had just gone up. I stood at the top of the stairs watching them. Vanessa was wearing a modest black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, mournful bun. She looked nothing like the woman who had clawed at my face this morning. She looked like a grieving granddaughter. My mother was arranging flowers in the foyer, her movements slow and heavy, practicing her sorrow. And Preston. He had showered, shaved, and put on a dark suit. He stood by the door checking his watch, his face composed into a mask of solemn responsibility. They had realized that threats and violence had failed to break me, so now they were deploying their most powerful weapon, the court of public opinion. They had invited the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, the people whose approval my mother craved like oxygen for an impromptu memorial dinner. I knew exactly what this was. It was an ambush wrapped in a casserole. I walked down the stairs. I was not wearing black. I was wearing a sharp navy blue blazer and trousers. I was done mourning the way they wanted me to. Maya, Mom said, looking up with a sad, weary smile that did not reach her eyes. I am so glad you came down. Please try to be civil tonight. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Marcus are coming. We need to show them that we are united in this difficult time. United, I repeated dryly. Is that what we are calling it? Please, Vanessa whispered, walking over to squeeze my hand. Her palms were cold. Just for tonight. For Grandpa. I almost laughed. They were using his name to desecrate his wishes. But I nodded. I would play my part. Not the part they wanted, but the part I needed to play to gather the final nails for their coffins. The doorbell rang. For the next 3 hours, I watched a masterclass in manipulation. As the house filled with murmuring relatives, Preston and Vanessa worked the room. They accepted condolences with graceful nods. They sighed deeply when people mentioned Grandpa. They played the perfect, devastated airs. I sat at the far end of the table, isolated. They had positioned me there on purpose, the outlier, the cold daughter who sat dry-eyed while everyone else wept. Preston stood up to give a toast halfway through the meal. He tapped his glass with a silver spoon, the sound chiming through the room. Thank you all for coming. He began, his voice thick with emotion. We are all heartbroken. Ezekiel was a great man, a titan. But, and this is hard for me to say, he was also a man who struggled in his final years. The room went silent. I felt the phone in my blazer pocket. I had started the voice recorder app the moment I sat down. We have been going through the finances. Preston continued, looking down at the table as if ashamed. And the truth is, Grandpa left us in a very difficult position. There are debts. Significant debts. He made some bad investments that he hid from us. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. It was a lie. A disgusting, slanderous lie. Grandpa had zero debt. His portfolio was pristine. Preston was projecting his own failures onto a dead man who couldn't defend himself. Aunt Sarah gasped. Oh no, I had no idea. We didn't want to burden anyone, Vanessa chimed in, wiping a tear from her cheek. But the reality is, we have to sell the house. We have to sell it immediately to settle the accounts and protect his reputation. We don't want his legacy to be bankruptcy. The table erupted in sympathetic murmurs. Poor Preston, poor Vanessa, carrying such a heavy load. Uncle Marcus looked at me. Maya, you must be devastated. But it is good you have Preston to handle this. You know how you are with money. It is better to let the men handle the business. I looked at Uncle Marcus. I looked at Preston, who was watching me with a predatory glint in his eyes. He was daring me to speak. He knew that if I exploded, if I yelled that he was a liar, I would look like the crazy, ungrateful daughter they had painted me to be. I would look like I was in denial. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. I looked Preston dead in the eye, and I said nothing. I let the silence stretch. I let them spin their web of lies. Every word Preston spoke about the non-existent debts, Every word Mom spoke about how Maya is just too emotional to understand was being recorded in high-definition audio. They were confessing to fraud. They were creating a record of slander that I could use to strip them of any claim they thought they had. Preston relaxed. He thought he had won. He thought my silence was submission. He finished his speech accepting the pats on the back, the offers of support. He successfully convinced the entire family that selling the estate was a noble act of rescue rather than a desperate act of theft. By 10 o'clock, the guests began to leave. They hugged Mom, whispering promises of prayer. They hugged Vanessa and Preston, telling them how strong they were. They looked at me with pity and hurried past as if my failure was contagious. I stood by the stairs as the last car pulled away. The warmth instantly evaporated from the room. The performance was over. The stage lights were off. My mother slumped onto the sofa exhausted. Vanessa kicked off her heels, her face twisting back into a scowl. Preston walked to the front door. He didn't just close it, he turned the deadbolt. Then he engaged the chain lock. Then he turned to face me. The grieving, humble nephew was gone. The desperate, cornered rat was back, and he was holding the keys to the castle. "Well," Preston said, loosening his tie and walking slowly toward me. "That went well. The family is on board. The realtor is coming at 8 in the morning. And you, Maya, behaved yourself. I am almost proud. I didn't back away. I felt the weight of the phone in my pocket. I had everything I needed." "You lied to them, Preston," I said calmly. "You slandered Grandpa. It is not a lie if it works," he sneered. "History is written by the victors, and tomorrow this house is sold. The wire transfer hits my account by Friday, and my problems go away." He stopped a foot away from me. "But we still have one loose end. You." He looked at Mom and Vanessa. "Go upstairs," he told them. Mom looked at him, then at me. She hesitated. "Preston." "What are you going to do?" I said. "Go upstairs." He roared, his patience snapping. "We need to have a family meeting. Just Maya and me. We need to finalize the terms of her departure." Vanessa grabbed Mom's arm and pulled her toward the stairs. They didn't look back. They left me alone with him. Again. Preston smiled, but there was no humor in it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a weapon, it was my car keys. He had swiped them from the kitchen counter while I was in the bathroom. "You are not going anywhere tonight, Maya," he whispered, tossing the keys in the air and catching them. "No more running to coffee shops. No more secret emails. The doors are locked. The windows are alarmed. It is just us." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying low. "You are going to sign those papers tonight, even if I have to break your fingers to make you hold the pen." I looked at the locked door. I looked at the man who thought he was a predator. He didn't know that he had just locked himself in a cage with the only person who knew how to skin him alive. "We will see about that, Preston," I said softly. But inside my heart was pounding. I had the evidence. I had the truth. But for the next 8 hours, until the sun rose and the lawyers arrived, I was trapped in a house with a man who had nothing left to lose. And the night was just beginning. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, marking the start of the day that Preston believed would be his victory. I sat in the high-backed armchair in the living room, my hands folded in my lap, watching him pace back and forth in front of the fireplace. He had consumed 3 glasses of scotch in the last hour. His movements were jerky and erratic, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings of panic and greed. He stopped pacing and looked at me. His eyes were glassy, but the malice in them was sharp and focused. "You brought this on yourself, Maya," he slurred slightly, pointing a finger at me. "I gave you every chance. I offered to let you leave with dignity. I offered to handle everything. But you had to be stubborn. You had to play the martyr." I did not respond. I simply watched him. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could. He checked his watch again, then looked toward the front window where the driveway was hidden in darkness. "They will be here any minute," he whispered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Two associates of mine. They specialize in evictions. They are going to escort you off the property, Maya. And if you resist, well, they are not known for their gentleness. They might break a few things. Maybe your furniture. Maybe your arm. Who knows? He laughed a dry, humorless sound. And do not bother screaming. The nearest neighbor is a mile away. And Mom and Vanessa. They took sleeping pills. They won't hear a thing. It is just you, me, and the consequences of your actions. My heart should have been racing. I should have been looking for a weapon or a way out, but I remained perfectly still. Preston thought he was the director of this play, orchestrating a scene of terror to force my submission. He had no idea that I had rewritten the script hours ago. He did not know that the moment I saw him lock the doors, I had sent a text message. A single word. Green. He did not know that the $5,000 I had transferred from my savings account that afternoon had hired a private security detail, two former military contractors who specialized in executive protection. They had been parked down the road in an unmarked van since sunset, watching the house through thermal imaging. They had seen Preston pacing. They had seen him make the call to his thugs. And they were currently positioned in the shadows of the front porch waiting for my signal. Headlights swept across the living room wall. A beat-up sedan rolled up the driveway, crunching over the gravel. The engine cut and two car doors slammed shut. Preston straightened his jacket, looking at me with triumph. "It is time," he said. "Last chance, Maya. Sign the papers or I open that door and let them do their job." I looked at him calmly. I adjusted my glasses. "Open it," I said. Preston blinked, confused by my lack of fear. He sneered, shaking his head. "Have it your way." He walked to the front door and unlocked the deadbolt. He swung the door open. Two men stepped into the foyer. They were large, wearing leather jackets and heavy boots. They smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. One of them had a scar running down his cheek. He looked at Preston, then at me. "This the girl?" the scarred man asked, his voice like gravel. "That is the trespasser," Preston confirmed, stepping back to let them pass. "Remove her. I do not care how you do it. Just get her out of my house." The men grinned. They cracked their knuckles and started walking toward me. The heavy thud of their boots on the hardwood floor was meant to intimidate, to make me cower. "Hey, sweetheart," the scarred man said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pair of heavy zip ties. "We can do this the easy way, or we can make it fun. Why don't you stand up?" I stayed seated. I took a slow breath. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you," I said softly. The men laughed. Preston laughed. "She thinks she is tough." Preston mocked. "Go on. Grab her." The scarred man lunged forward, reaching for my arm. The front door, which Preston had left slightly ajar, exploded inward. Glass shattered as a flashbang grenade rolled into the foyer. A blinding white light filled the room, followed by a deafening bang that disoriented everyone. Before the ringing in my ears could stop, two dark shapes moved through the smoke with terrifying speed and precision. "Police, get down. Get down." They were not police, but they shouted with the authority of men who had cleared rooms in war zones. "My security team." The scarred man never saw it coming. One of the contractors tackled him from the side, driving him into the wall with a bone-jarring crunch. The other thug tried to turn, but he was swept off his feet and pinned to the floor, his arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle. Preston screamed. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside. He scrambled away like a crab, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the chaos that had erupted in his living room. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. The two thugs were zip-tied with their own restraints, face down on the rug. My security lead, a man named Henderson, stood over them, his weapon drawn but pointed safely at the floor. He looked at me and nodded. "Secure," Henderson said calmly. "Ma'am, are you injured?" I stood up slowly, brushing a piece of lint from my blazer. "I am fine, Henderson. Thank you." I walked over to where Preston was cowering against the grandfather clock. He was shaking violently. His face was pale, stripped of all arrogance. He looked up at me, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Who are these people?" he stammered. "I hired them, Preston," I said, my voice cold. "Because unlike you, I do not rely on cheap thugs to fight my battles. I rely on professionals." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. I threw it onto his lap. "What is this?" he whispered. "That is a criminal complaint," I explained. "I have it filled out and ready to file. Attempted assault, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, terroristic threats. And since you invited these two gentlemen into the house to harm me, I can add solicitation of a violent crime to the list." Preston looked at the thugs on the floor, then at the formidable security guards, and finally at the paper in his lap. He realized the trap had snapped shut. You set me up," he choked out. "I protected myself," I corrected. "Now here is the situation. Henderson here is a former federal marshal. He can call the state police right now. These two men will be arrested and they will flip on you in 5 minutes to get a plea deal. You will be in handcuffs before sunrise, your career, your reputation, your freedom gone." Preston began to weep. It was a pathetic gasping sound. "Please, Maya, don't. Vanessa. Think of Vanessa." "I am thinking of her," I said. "That is why I am giving you a choice." He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Choice option A," I continued. "We call the police. You go to jail tonight. Option B, you tell your friends here to leave and never come back. You sit in this chair until morning, and at 9 o'clock sharp, we go to the law offices of Miller and Associates downtown." Preston froze. Miller and Associates. That was the firm where he had bribed a lawyer to fake the will. His eyes darted back and forth as he processed this. He thought I was walking into his trap. He thought if we went to the lawyer, his fake document would trump everything, and he could still win the house legally without going to jail for assault. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, his mind working furiously. He figured he could survive this night. Let me feel like I won the battle and then crush me with the legal paperwork in the morning. "Okay," he breathed, nodding rapidly. "Okay. We go to the lawyer. No police. Please." I looked at Henderson. "Cut them loose," I said, gesturing to the thugs. Henderson cut the zip ties. The two men scrambled up, glaring at Preston, and ran out the door without looking back. They knew when a job had gone south. I turned back to Preston. 9 a.m. "Preston, do not be late." I walked upstairs to my room, leaving him sitting on the floor in the wreckage of his ego. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking he had survived. He was thinking that his bribed lawyer, Mr. Miller, would produce the 2010 will that left everything to Mom and he would still get the money. He had no idea that I wasn't taking him to Miller and Associates to read the will. I was taking him there because that was where I had told the real executor to meet us. Preston thought he was walking into a negotiation. He did not know he was walking into an ambush that had been 5 years in the making. I locked my bedroom door, but this time I slept. The heavy lifting was done. Tomorrow I would just have to sign the paperwork that would end his life as he knew it. The office of Miller and Associates was located in a strip mall on the edge of town, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a payday loan center. It smelled of lemon furniture polish and stale cigarette smoke that had seeped into the beige carpets decades ago. This was not the kind of place where multi-million-dollar estates were usually settled, but it was exactly the kind of place where a desperate man like Preston felt comfortable doing business. I sat in a folding metal chair in the corner, my hands resting on my knees. I was wearing the same navy blazer from the night before. I had not slept much, but my mind was razor sharp. Across from me, sitting behind a desk that was too large for the room, was Mr. Miller. He was a small, nervous man with a comb-over and a suit that looked 2 sizes too big. He kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, avoiding eye contact with me. Preston, Vanessa, and Mom sat in the plush leather chairs facing the desk. They looked like a tableau of triumphant greed. Preston was bouncing his leg up and down, a nervous tick that betrayed his adrenaline. Vanessa was scrolling through Zillow on her phone, likely picking out a new house in a better neighborhood. Mom just looked tired, staring at a stain on the wall, convincing herself that she was doing the right thing. Mr. Miller cleared his throat, shuffling a stack of papers. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Ezekiel Brooks," he announced, his voice thin and reedy. He picked up a document. It looked old. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. This document, dated June 14, 2010, names Louise Brooks as the sole executor and beneficiary of the entire estate, including all real property, liquid assets, and personal effects. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I knew this document existed. In 2010, Grandpa had briefly updated his will after a minor health scare. It was a standard placeholder will, but that was 13 years ago. Before he started the transport company's expansion, before he bought the vineyards, and long before he realized that his daughter and her family were vultures waiting for him to die. Preston turned to me, a smug grin plastering his face. "Did you hear that, Maya? Sole beneficiary? That means Mom gets everything, and since Mom has granted me power of attorney, I control everything." He looked at Mr. Miller. "Is there any mention of Maya Brooks in this document?" Mr. Miller scanned the page, his eyes darting back and forth. "No, sir. There is no specific bequest for Amaya Brooks." Preston laughed. It was a loud barking sound that filled the small room. "There you go. It is legal. It is official. You are entitled to nothing." He reached across the desk and grabbed a pen. He shoved it into Mom's hand. "Sign it, Mom. Sign the acceptance of the executorship. Then sign the transfer deed I prepared. We can have the house listed by noon." Mom hesitated. She held the pen, the tip hovering over the paper. She looked at me. For a second I saw a flicker of guilt. She remembered the little girl she had raised, however reluctantly. She remembered Grandpa's voice telling her to look out for the family. "Mom, do not think about it," Vanessa urged, leaning in. "Think about us. Think about the debt. Think about getting Preston out of trouble so we can be a happy family again." "I am doing this for you," Mom whispered. She pressed the pen to the paper. I watched in silence as the ink flowed. I watched my mother sign away her father's legacy to a man who had manipulated her for years. I watched her seal her own fate. "Excellent," Preston said, snatching the paper away the moment she finished. He signed his own name on the transfer deed with a flourish. He stood up, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Janet." "It is Preston." "Yes, we are good to go. The paperwork is signed. Put the sign in the yard, listed at $1.8 million for a quick sale, cash offers only. Yes, I want it sold by Friday." He hung up and turned to me. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Maya. If you leave anything behind, I am calling a junk removal service to throw it in a dumpster." He began to gather his papers, stuffing them into his briefcase. Vanessa stood up and hugged him. They were celebrating. They were already spending the money in their heads. They thought the war was over. I remained seated. I crossed my legs and smoothed the fabric of my trousers. "Are you sure that is the last will?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their celebration like a knife. Preston stopped. He looked at me with annoyance. "What did you say?" I asked. "If you are sure that is the last will and testament of Ezekiel Brooks," I repeated, looking directly at Mr. Miller. "Because, Mr. Miller, as an officer of the court, you have a duty to ensure that the document you are executing is the most current one. If you knowingly execute an outdated will when a newer one exists, that is grounds for disbarment and prison." Mr. Miller went pale. He looked at Preston. "Preston, you said there were no other documents." "There aren't," Preston shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "She is bluffing. She is just trying to stall. Ignore her. We have the signature. Let's go." He grabbed Vanessa's arm and turned toward the door. I looked at my watch. It was 9:15, right on time. Before Preston could reach the handle, the heavy door to the office swung open. It didn't just open, it was pushed with authority. Two uniformed bailiffs stepped into the room flanking the doorway. The air in the room seemed to change instantly, shifting from the sweaty desperation of a strip mall lawyer's office to the serious gravity of a federal courtroom. Behind the bailiffs walked a man who looked like he owned the entire building. He was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Preston's car. He carried a leather attaché case and walked with a quiet, terrifying confidence. Preston froze. He took a step back, bumping into Vanessa. Who are you?" Preston stammered. "This is a private meeting." The man ignored Preston completely. He walked past him as if he were furniture and stood in front of Mr. Miller's desk. He placed his briefcase down and clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the stunned silence. "Mr. Miller," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "My name is Arthur Jenkins. I am the senior partner at Jenkins, Stone and Lee in San Francisco." Mr. Miller looked like he was going to vomit. He knew the name. Everyone in the legal world knew the name. Jenkins was a shark who ate small-time lawyers for breakfast. Mr. Jenkins turned slowly to face the room. He looked at Mom, who was trembling. He looked at Vanessa, who was clutching her purse. And finally, he looked at Preston. "I am here representing the Ezekiel Brooks Living Trust," Mr. Jenkins said, "and I am afraid the document you just signed is not worth the paper it is written on." Preston's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. "Trust," he whispered. "What trust?" Mr. Jenkins smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who was about to drop a guillotine. "The trust that Mr. Brooks established 3 years ago," Mr. Jenkins explained, "which holds the title to every single asset in this family. The house, the land, the accounts. None of it belongs to the estate, Preston. It all belongs to the trust." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He held it up. "And I am here to read the terms of that trust to the sole trustee." He turned to me and bowed his head slightly. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks. My apologies for the delay. Traffic coming from the city was terrible. Are you ready to take possession of your property?" I stood up then. I looked at Preston, whose knees were buckling. I looked at my mother, who had covered her mouth with her hand. "Yes, Arthur," I said, walking over to stand beside him. "I believe I am." The trap had snapped shut, and the sound was beautiful. The heavy leather briefcase hit the desk with a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a block. Mr. Jenkins did not sit down. He stood over the cowering figure of Mr. Miller, radiating the kind of authority that cannot be bought, only earned through decades of courtroom warfare. The room, which just moments ago had been filled with the celebratory noise of my family plotting my demise, was now so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Mr. Jenkins opened the blue binder he had removed from his case. He smoothed the pages down with a deliberate, terrifying calmness. He looked at Preston, who was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "You are operating under a misconception, Mr. Brooks." Jenkins began, his voice deep and resonant. "You believe that by producing a will from 2010 you have secured control over this estate. Under normal circumstances, if your grandfather had died intestate or with a simple will, you might be right. The estate would go into probate. The courts would decide. And you could drag this out for years." He paused, letting the words sink in. However, Ezekiel Brooks was a businessman. He understood that probate is public, expensive, and messy. He wanted none of that. That is why, on October 14, 2020, he established the Ezekiel Family Trust. Trust. Preston choked out the word as if it were poison. Grandpa didn't know anything about trusts. "He knew enough to hire me," Jenkins replied coldly. "And under California law, assets placed into a living trust are not subject to probate. They do not pass through a will. They pass directly to the control of the trustee, effective the moment of death. The will you just forced your mother to sign is legally irrelevant. It is a ghost document for a house that no longer belongs to Ezekiel Brooks as an individual. My mother, who had been clutching her signed acceptance form like a lifeline, looked up with confusion. "But if it is a family trust," she said, her voice trembling with a desperate hope, "then I am still the matriarch. I am still the head of the family. I should be the trustee." Mr. Jenkins turned to the second page of the document. He adjusted his glasses. "The trust agreement is very specific, Mrs. Brooks. It designates a successor trustee who has absolute authority to manage, sell, or retain all assets. It also designates a sole beneficiary who inherits the full value of the corpus upon Ezekiel's passing." He looked at me. I stood tall, meeting his gaze. I knew what was coming, but hearing it aloud felt like the final exhale after holding my breath for a lifetime. "The sole trustee and sole beneficiary of the Ezekiel Family Trust is Maya Brooks." The scream that tore from Vanessa's throat was primal. It was the sound of a woman watching her future incinerate in front of her eyes. She jumped up, knocking her chair backward. "No!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That is a lie. He wouldn't do that. I was his favorite. I am the one with the husband and the social standing. She is nobody. She is just the help." "Sit down, Mrs. Brooks," Jenkins barked. The command was so sharp that Vanessa actually froze. "He is senile," Preston yelled, finding his voice. He stood up, sweat pouring down his face. "You coerced him. You and Maya tricked an old man into signing this. I will contest it. I will drag you through every court in the state. He was not of sound mind in 2020. I expected this." And so did Grandpa. Mr. Jenkins reached into his bag and pulled out a laptop. He opened it and placed it on the desk facing the family. He pressed play. The video was high definition. It showed Grandpa Ezekiel sitting in his study looking strong and sharp. He was holding today's newspaper in one hand and his driver's license in the other. He looked directly into the camera. "My name is Ezekiel Brooks," he said, his voice filling the small office. "I am recording this statement to accompany my trust documents. I am of sound mind. I am not under duress. And I am making these decisions because I see my family clearly, perhaps for the first time." On the screen, Grandpa leaned forward. "I built this company from the ground up. I drove trucks until my back gave out. I know the value of $1 because I bled for every single one. But I look at my daughter Louise, and I see a woman who cares more about appearances than substance. I look at my granddaughter Vanessa, and I see someone who thinks the world owes her a living just because she is beautiful. And I look at the man she married, Preston." Preston flinched as Grandpa said his name. "I see a man who confuses gambling with investing." Grandpa continued, his voice hard. "A man who looks at my life's work and sees only a quick cash out." Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of vindication. He had seen it all. "I am leaving everything to Maya," Grandpa said, his eyes softening on the screen. "Not because she is perfect, but because she is the only one who ever asked me about the miles, not the money. She is the only one who knows how to work. To the rest of you, I leave my love, but I will not leave you the means to destroy yourselves. If you want money, go out and earn it like I did." The video ended. The screen went black. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then the chaos broke. My mother let out a low moan, her eyes rolling back in her head. She slumped sideways in her chair, sliding down to the floor in a heap of dramatic black fabric. It was a theatrical faint, the kind she used whenever she needed to escape accountability, but no one moved to help her. Vanessa dropped to her knees beside her, sobbing hysterically, but her eyes were on me, filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You stole it!" she screamed. "You stole our lives." Preston did not scream. He did not faint. He turned a color that I can only describe as corpse gray. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He was doing the math. He was calculating the debt he owed the house he had already promised to sell, and the prison sentence waiting for him. Mr. Jenkins closed the binder with a snap. The assets include the primary residence in Oakland, the 2 commercial vineyards in Napa Valley, and the transport fleet. The total valuation is approximately $45 million, and it all belongs to Maya. $45 million. The number hung in the air. Preston let out a whimpering sound. He had sold his soul for a measly $2 million, not knowing the true scale of what he was trying to steal. Mr. Jenkins looked at the paper Preston and Mom had just signed the transfer deed for the house. He picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were something dirty. "And now we have a problem, mister," Jenkins said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He looked at Preston. "You just signed a legal document purporting to transfer title of a property you do not own. You instructed a real estate agent to list a property that belongs to a trust. You attempted to liquidate assets that are not yours to cover personal debts." Preston shook his head, tears leaking from his eyes. I didn't know. It was a mistake." "Ignorance is not a defense for fraud, Preston," I said, speaking for the first time. Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Indeed. What you have done here today, attempting to bypass a trust to sell real estate for personal gain, falls under the definition of wire fraud and title fraud. And since the trust is a separate legal entity, this is a federal offense." Preston looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Maya, please, we are family." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had threatened to plant drugs in my car. I looked at the man who had called thugs to break my bones. "Family doesn't steal, Preston," I said softly. Mr. Jenkins pulled out his phone. "I have a duty to report this to the district attorney, and considering the amount of money involved, I believe the FBI will be interested as well." Preston slid out of his chair, falling to his knees on the dirty carpet of the office. He grabbed the leg of my pants. "Maya, don't let him call. Please, I will do anything. I will go away. Just don't let me go to prison." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger. Just the cool detachment of a forensic accountant closing a case file. I pulled my leg away from his grasp. "I think you better save your energy for your lawyer, Preston," I said. "You are going to need a better one than Mr. Miller." I turned to Mr. Jenkins. "Make the call." The silence that followed Mr. Jenkins' phone call was not the quiet of a library or a church. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb before the stone is rolled away. Preston sat on the floor, his expensive suit rumpled, his breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He looked at the door as if he expected a firing squad to burst through. In a way, he was right. Mr. Jenkins did not look at him. He simply organized his papers, sliding the blue trust binder back into his briefcase with a decisive snap. He checked his watch. "They are efficient," Jenkins noted, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The federal building is only 3 blocks away." "Who?" Vanessa whispered. She was still on her knees, her face streaked with mascara, looking from her husband to the lawyer with wide, terrified eyes. "Who is coming?" Before Jenkins could answer, the door to the small office opened again. This time, there was no dramatic flair. 2 men and a woman walked in. They were not wearing uniforms. They wore navy blue windbreakers, with yellow, bold lettering on the back that made Preston let out a low, keen sound of despair. FBI. Behind them stood another man in a gray suit holding a tablet. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie a desperate criminal could spin, walked straight to Preston. She did not ask who he was. She knew. She had the file I had sent. "Preston Brooks," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I am Special Agent Henderson. You are under arrest." Preston scrambled backward, his heels digging into the carpet, pushing himself until his back hit the wall. "No," he stammered, holding his hands up as if to ward off a blow. "There is a mistake. I am a financial advisor. I manage assets. This is a misunderstanding. My wife, tell them, Vanessa. Tell them I am honest. The agent pulled a pair of handcuffs from her belt. The metal clicked ominously in the small room. We have the transfer logs, Mr. Brooks, she said, stepping forward. We have the emails you sent to your offshore accounts. We have the chat logs from the crypto forums where you discussed laundering client funds. And we have the attempted fraudulent transfer of the Brooks estate title that you initiated this morning. She reached down, grabbed his wrist, and yanked him to his feet. You are charged with 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft, 1 count of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit money laundering. She spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final. Vanessa stood up, her hands trembling. She looked at the agent, then at Preston. Embezzlement. She repeated, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? He is a partner at the firm. We have millions in the portfolio. The IRS agent stepped forward, looking at his tablet. Mrs. Brooks, according to our preliminary audit, your husband has liquidated 90% of his client holdings to cover personal gambling losses. He is currently over $3 million in debt to various unsecured creditors. The house you live in is in foreclosure, the cars are leased, and the accounts are empty. Empty, Vanessa breathed. Preston refused to look at her. He stared at the floor, shame radiating off him in waves. He has been running a Ponzi scheme for 18 months, the agent continued, and he was using your family inheritance as his exit strategy. Vanessa stared at her husband, the man she had bragged about, the man she had held up as the standard of success while belittling me for years. The illusion shattered instantly, leaving behind only the ugly truth of who he really was. You broke, pathetic loser, Vanessa screamed. She did not run to hug him. She did not ask if he was okay. She lunged at him, her hands clawing at his face. The agents had to step in, pulling her back. You lied to me, she shrieked, struggling against the agent grip. You told me we were rich. You told me you handled everything. I signed those papers because you said it was legal. She turned to the agents, her eyes wild with self-preservation. I did not know. You have to believe me. I'm a victim here. He tricked me. He forced me to sign. I want a divorce. I want him out of my life. Preston looked up, then tears streaming down his face. Vanessa, please. I did it for us. I wanted you to have the lifestyle you wanted. Shut up! She spat at him. I do not know you. Take him away. I watched them. It was a grotesque display. The love and loyalty they preached about at the dinner table last night had evaporated the moment the money ran out. They were not partners. They were accomplices who turned on each other the second the heat got too high. The agents began to lead Preston out of the room. He looked back at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, only fear. Maya, he pleaded, help me. The loan sharks, if I go to prison, they cannot get to me, but if I get out on bail. I did not say anything. I just watched him disappear into the hallway, flanked by federal agents. His life as a free man was over. Vanessa collapsed into the chair, sobbing into her hands. Not tears of grief for her husband, but tears of pity for herself. My reputation, she wailed. My friends, the club, everyone will know. I am ruined. I walked over to her. I stood right in front of her until she looked up. Her mascara was running, ruining her perfect face. She looked at me, waiting for me to comfort her, waiting for me to fall back into the role of the supportive little sister. You are not ruined because of Preston, Vanessa, I said quietly. You are ruined because you are greedy. She flinched. I did not know he was stealing, she whispered. But you knew he was trying to sell Grandpa House, I countered. You knew he was threatening me. You knew he tried to plant drugs in my car. You saw him call those thugs last night, and you did nothing. I leaned closer. You stood by him when he was hurting me. You only turned on him when he hurt your bank account. I have nowhere to go, she stammered. The house is in foreclosure. Maya, where will I live? I stood up straight, smoothing my blazer. I hear they are hiring night shift waitresses at the diner on Main Street, I said. It is honest work. Grandpa would approve. Vanessa stared at me, with her mouth open, realizing finally that there was no safety net left. I turned away from her. I was done with her. There was only one person left in the room, my mother. Louise was sitting in the corner chair where she had been since she fainted. She was awake now. She had watched the entire arrest in silence. She looked small. The imperious matriarch who had ruled our family with judgment and coldness had withered into a frightened old woman. She looked at the empty doorway where her favorite son-in-law had just been dragged out in handcuffs. She looked at Vanessa, who was a broken mess. And then she looked at me. She looked at the daughter she had admitted she never loved. The daughter she had called a mistake. The daughter who now owned every single thing in her world. Maya, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. I began to pack my bag. I put the trust binder inside. I nodded to Mr. Jenkins, signaling that we were ready to leave. Maya, please, Mom said louder this time. She tried to stand up, but her legs were weak. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the edge of the desk. I stopped and looked at her. What do you want, Louise? I asked. I did not call her Mom. I could not. Not anymore. She flinched at the use of her first name. I did not know about the fraud, she said, tears filling her eyes. You have to believe me. Preston told me it was the only way. He said he was saving the family. He was saving himself, I said. And you let him. You signed the deed, Louise. You were willing to throw me out on the street this morning. You were going to let him call a junk removal service for my things. Remember. She sobbed, a harsh, racking sound. I was scared. I made a mistake. But I am your mother. No, I said firmly. You made that very clear yesterday. You are just the woman who raised me out of obligation. You said you did not owe me anything. Well, now the books are balanced. I do not owe you anything either. I turned to walk out. Maya. I heard the rustle of fabric, the thud of knees hitting the floor. I stopped. I turned around slowly. My mother was on her knees. In the middle of the dirty office carpet, surrounded by the wreckage of her family dignity, Louise Brooks was kneeling before me. Her hands were clasped together in a pose of supplication she usually reserved for church. Please, she begged, tears dripping off her chin. Do not leave me like this. Do not take the house. It is all I have. I am old. I have nowhere else to go. I will do anything. I will change. Just please. Forgive me. The sight of her kneeling should have felt like a victory. It should have felt like the ultimate revenge. But as I looked down at her, I did not feel triumph. I felt a profound sense of closure. The giant who had cast a shadow over my entire life was just a person. A weak, flawed, selfish person. I looked at Mr. Jenkins. He was waiting for my instructions. Get up, Louise, I said, my voice tired. She looked up, hope lighting her eyes. You will help me. I walked to the door. I did not offer her a hand. I will not let you starve, I said without looking back. But you are never stepping foot in Grandpa House again. I walked out into the sunlight, leaving them behind in the shadows they had created. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal motions and logistics. I did not go back to the estate to sleep. I stayed at a hotel downtown, preferring the sterile, clean sheets to the heavy memories of that house. Mr. Jenkins handled the eviction notices. By Friday afternoon, the house was empty. Preston was being held without bail, considered a flight risk. Vanessa had moved into a cheap motel on the highway, selling her designer purses on eBay to pay for the room. And Louise, she was waiting for my verdict. I met her at a coffee shop on Saturday morning. She looked frail, wearing a simple dress, no jewelry. She ordered a water. I slid a small envelope across the table. What is this? She asked, her hands shaking as she picked it up. Inside were the keys to a studio apartment in a senior living community on the south side of town. It was clean, safe, and modest. It was a far cry from the mansion she was used to, but it was a roof over her head. The trust has paid the rent for 6 months, I explained, and I have arranged for a monthly stipend for food and utilities. It is not a lot, but it is enough to survive." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you. I knew you had a good heart." "There is a condition," I interrupted. Her smile faltered. "Condition." "The stipend is contingent on employment," I said. "But since you are past retirement age and have no skills, I have arranged a volunteer position for you. At the soup kitchen on 4th Street. You are required to work 20 hours a week serving food to the homeless. If you miss a shift, the stipend stops." Her jaw dropped. "The soup kitchen?" "But Maya, those people, that neighborhood, those people are the ones Grandpa respected," I said sharply. "He respected anyone who was down on their luck but kept trying. You have spent your whole life looking down on people, Louise. Now you are going to spend your twilight years looking them in the eye and serving them. It is the only way you will ever learn what family really means." She looked at the keys, then at me. She saw the steel in my eyes. She nodded slowly, accepting her penance. "And Vanessa?" she asked quietly. "What about your sister?" I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. "Vanessa has a college degree that Grandpa paid for," I said. "She is young, she is able-bodied, she can figure it out. She gets nothing from the trust, not a dime." Louise watched me go. She did not ask for more. She finally understood that the bank of forgiveness was closed. I spent the next month preparing the estate for sale. I did not keep the big house. It was too big, too full of ghosts. I sold it to a nice family with 3 kids and a golden retriever. The proceeds of the sale, along with the liquidated assets from Preston recovered accounts, went into a new fund. The Ezekiel Brooks Scholarship Fund, designed to pay full tuition for trade schools for underprivileged kids in Oakland. Grandpa would have loved that. On my last day in town, I went to the garage behind the house. I pulled the tarp off the one thing I had kept. The Iron Lady. Grandpa's first truck. A 1978 Peterbilt restored to mint condition. The chrome shined like a mirror. The red paint gleamed in the afternoon sun. I tossed my suitcase into the passenger seat. I climbed up into the cab, the smell of old leather and diesel welcoming me home like a warm hug. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that shook the ground. I put it in gear and rolled down the driveway. I passed the spot where Vanessa had thrown wine on me. I passed the gate where the thugs had tried to break in. I left it all in the rearview mirror. I was not Maya the accountant anymore. I was not the unwanted daughter. I was the trustee. I was the CEO of Brooks Logistics. And I was heading north to Napa Valley where the vineyards were waiting for harvest. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my hair. I turned on the radio, finding an old country station Grandpa used to love. The road stretched out before me, wide and open. I had lost a family that never loved me, but I had found myself. And as I shifted gears, accelerating onto the highway, I knew one thing for sure. The best revenge is not destroying your enemies. It is living a life so full, so rich, and so free that they no longer exist in your world at all. This is Maya signing off. If you enjoyed this story of justice and reclaiming your power, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from toxic family to find your peace? Until next time, keep driving forward.